let's jump into variables. The variables just sort of lays the groundwork for the next few chapters, basically. So we just need to understand a little bit about variables and how to set up a variable and when you would use a variable. And then we'll go through and look at variable structure first. Then we'll look at some of these other variables. We won't spend a lot of time on section 2 and 3, but I'll touch on it to show you what it is. This is a program language. It does have a lot of technical complexity behind the scenes because some of these programs could get very large. Most of the time, they're very short programs that do a specific purpose. So in terms of variables, we have to look at our declarations here. And we're going to eventually open up this file called variables, and we're going to make some changes to it. Start down here. Okay, variable rules. A variable name rule. The first letter of the variable must be a letter. That's just a rule that you need to remember. And you cannot use special characters in the name. The name size can be a little longer than 255. I don't know anybody who would violate that rule. It can't be a reserved name, like the word sum or average or something like that. You can't use a name that's reserved. You can't have two variables using the same name. It's wise to not use two variables the same name in the same routine, of course, but you want to make sure that even within the modules, I try to keep my variables completely independent of each other. Now, the dim command is the most important part. That declares the information. So if I want to declare it as a x, as an integer, or declare it as a string, declare this as a Boolean. So this is the declaration that defines what the numeric value of this particular variable is. And then everything I do down here is going to be using that variable, and we have to stick with the same data type. Here's some data types here. You've got your Boolean, you've got byte, integer, a long number. So this is a very large number, as you can see. If your numbers are planned to be that large, you can do that. A byte is only like 255 numbers. So like age, that would work good for that one, or something that falls within the 255 range. That just keeps the variables and the size of the memory, just kind of reduces it down a little bit, but choose them the right time. We got our string, we got our date style, and currency style down here. So these are the different data types we could use. And then here's the different formats we could use. I can say dim x as integer. That declares that as an integer. And so we're going to use x in our variables. You can say x, I, x, y as integer. So you can put commas in here to declare multiple ones the same. If you have different ones, you want to put them on the same line, you can say I as integer, comma, m as long. And so you can string them out this way if you want to do it on one line instead of using multiple lines to do that. And we can also use the Excel sheet as my variable storage location. So here's some text strings. So let's go through and just look at some, declare some things and do this way. All right, so let's just run through a few of these variables here. Assignments, yeah, that's fine. And then we'll just kind of run through a few examples. Let's see, I think I want to open up file open. So here is some items here, and I can actually store stuff into a variable, or I can use a physical location. So I'm going to do it without variables right now, and then I'm going to do it with variables. So I can simply take a couple of things here and maybe string these together or something like that, and then store that into a storage place and then pull it from there. So I'm going to use this as my storage place. I'm going to pull this number, and then I want to pull this and take it from the storage place. So I can do that by going up to my Visual Basic and going up to variables. Here it is. add a module, and sub, I can simply say range A5, close, dot value equals, and I'm going to put something in that storage space. I'm not using variables, I'm going to use Excel to store these variables. In fact, what I'll do is I'll put this at maybe O or something like that, or maybe P. So I'll put this in cell P, this, and I'll put in there the word test. Then I'm going to say range, and then I'm going to say P, all this here, and that's going to be equal to the range B5, 5 dot value. So what I'm saying here is I'm putting this range, this whatever's in range B5 over here, I'm putting that in cells P6. I'm storing this into a variable location on the sheet, okay? I'm not using variables, but I'm showing you that you can do this without variables by using a position or a storage place on the sheet. So there's my storage place for that. I'm putting test in there, and then I'm putting this sports city in there. I'm sticking that in that cell there, okay? Then I can come along here and say range A5 dot value is equal to, and then I can put in these ranges here. This, that's going to be equal to a test with an and percent, and then my A6, P6. Oh, I shouldn't say P6. This should be Q5. Sorry. So this one here is going to be 5. Okay, so what I'm saying here is I'm going to store this word test in, I'll put a space here too. So I'm going to store the word test in P5, and I'm going to store the word sports city in Q5. And then in A5, I'm going to actually put in this test, the sports city. So I'm storing these first in a variable in a storage location, and then I'm going to patch them together. So if I just run this, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Then we're going to convert it to variables to show you the difference. So here, P5, you put it in that storage place. Now I'm going to put the value of sports city in there. See it? Then I'm going to take both of those and patch them together and put it test sports city. So there's that. Now, if I use variables to do this, I'm not using a physical location. I'm just using a location. So if I come up here and I say dim, okay, I'll say v1, value 1, comma, value 2 as string. There's my value 1 and value 2 as string. So here I can simply say v1 is equal to test, because I've declared that v1 is a string, and we're putting a text string in there. And then I can say v2 is equal to whatever's in v5. Then I can go to a5, and I can simply say v1 with an and percent v2. It kind of cleans things up a little bit. Really less information here because my variable names are very small, and I keep copying that code all over the place. So what I'm doing is I'm storing test in this variable location or the storage location. I'm storing the sports city in this one, and then I'm going to patch them together. in the bottom here, I can actually put a message box and put these two together that way too. So let's try that. So here's going to put V1. Actually, let's do it. Let me do one. Let me close this off. And let me come out and add my view local. Let's watch it this way. So we're going to go to, get ready. Declaration is done. Now you see the variables down below. They're using the locals window. So V1 was just defined. And it stored it into the variable V1 and put test in there. Now it's going to put in V2 the sports city value. Now it's going to take those two variable locations and patch them together. So a variable is just a storage location. And so you might have to gather some information first and then store it into a variable in order to later recall it. You see, so that's kind of the idea of what a variable is. So that's really all there is with it. We're going to be using variables for counters and stuff like that when we get in a little further up. I don't have to use a variable. I could use an Excel position on the screen to do this just as well. And that's what I wanted to show you, that difference. For very, very large programs and very sophisticated programs, variables is an integral part of this. So they don't want to keep storing stuff on Excel because it's too much I/O. That puts stuff back and forth between Excel and the code. That takes a lot of time. And so it's much faster if you use variables because you're not actually storing something in a physical location on Excel. And so you'll see your code will gain some speed if it takes a long time. So you have a program that runs in maybe 15 minutes, okay, using registered cell locations. It might run in 10 minutes using variables or something like that. So that's kind of the idea. All right?
It's similar to like U substitution, right?
Yeah. Yeah, what you store it there, you can use it at any time. See it? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, right,
Yes.
right. So that's really all the variable is, okay? And we'll be using this a little bit. Just you'll know what a dim is, that dimensions it, or the dimensions of it, or the size of it, basically. You have to declare it first, and then you have to set it. Now, let me just walk through some of these others over here. These are a little bit more far-fetched, but they recommend you use this if it falls in these categories. So this is called a public variable. Now what this is, if you need to make a variable available to all procedures within the module or modules, then you can do it this way. So I can create a procedure on top of my modules. I can come up to the top up here and say dim testy as string. So I can declare it on the top of the screen up here, and therefore I can use the testy in any program I want. I don't have to declare it here because it's already been declared above up there. In this case, I could actually say V1, comma, V2. And then I don't need to declare it here. I'll comment that out. So I don't need to declare it there if I declare it up on top. And that means I could actually use those same variable positions in multiple routines. So if I come up here and I do it this way, and let me open up my sheet first. Wrong one, variable one. And then, so I'm not declaring it here, I'm declaring on the top. So if I simply go to my, see, it's going to work now, see it? Because it's using the variable declarations that I declared up here. So that way you don't have to actually redeclare them all the time. You just declare your global variables, and then you just simply use them at that point, however you want. That's what the public variables are. So there are public variables. There's private variables. A private variable says that it's available to other modules. It is not available to other modules. So in other words, if you have like module 1 and module 2, then a private variable will only work in module 1 or module 2. But a public variable will, doesn't matter where if you declare it in module 1, then you can use it in module 2. So it doesn't matter. So it's just kind of a little bit tedious, a little bit thing to keep track of. A constant variable is a static number. It's a number you can put in your system and define that as a static value. So I say constant C as integer, and then once you put something in, then you can't really change it. It's a constant number. It just stays that number all the time. A static variable will, again, stay static. So let's say static counter as integer, then it simply won't count. It will keep as a static value that will always remain that way. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff down here, ways to declare modules above, parentheses around. There's all sorts of little tips and tricks in here. And then I went through some exercises to show you this, but all we really need to know about in the class is just regular variables in most situations. These are just unique things if you want to declare this way. Now, arrays are simply a variable that contains multiple values. So I might have a variable that has, maybe it's got like 5 values in the variable. So what you do is you pull them out. So here, this example right here. See, here is test T is equal to, and I say 1 semicolon 2 semicolon 3. So there's 3 variables in that particular field. In that single register, there's 3 variables. And if I take this out, you can pull these out. See, in this case, I'm splitting it and to listen them all out there. So give you an example there. So down here I say, here's var equals 1, 2, 3. It's this my array equals split variable, so I didn't show it that way either. Let's see. Well, these are all a little bit more complicated, I guess. But essentially what you do is you can pull it out by specifying the variable name, and like you says, number is number 3. You put in a number in here. I want to pull the 3rd value out of the test. So what we'd have in this particular case, if I had a variable called test is equal to, comma 1, semicolon 2, comma 3, like this. If I had something like that, then I can say test, comma 2. Okay, I can say MSG box, test 2. So what that does, it says, define the variable and put 3 values in that variable, 1, 2, and 3. And then you say message box, give me the 2nd value in that variable. So it gets a little complicated, I know, but this is something that, at least making you aware of it, so that if you do run across arrays, if somebody has set up an array, at least you'll be aware of what it is and how it works. Part of what I'm doing here is just providing you information so that you can read your code a little bit better. Now, in these array functions, there are some unique commands: the split function, the join function, the redim function, and the preserve function, and the L bound and U bound and is array. So these are just some array-related commands. And so again, when you see these commands, you can go back to the reference book and figure out what they do, and you can read them that way. So that's really all I wanted to touch on, is just make you aware of that. Because see, the problem is a lot of people tell me that they have a bunch of code that somebody else wrote, and they've got to go figure out their code. And so they may not know what a certain command is used for and how it's used. And so you can look that up, and maybe they're using arrays, I don't know, but then you might have to dive into that to understand their code. It may not be something you would use or not, but if somebody else uses it, you still have to read your code. And the thing that I also talk to people about is that once you write your code, once you learn a little bit about Visual Basic, up to this point, if you go back right now, maybe before tomorrow, go look at some code that other people have written in the Visual Basic code that you are familiar with. and open up that code and see if you can understand it. Now, if you were to look at that code at the beginning of the class, you wouldn't understand. It would be all Greek, right? But now when you go through it, you understand some of the commands. We've touched on these commands, and so you have a basic idea of what these systems are capable of doing. And you'll be able to understand the code a little bit better. That's all. So just
Cool.
push follow through it. Yeah, go ahead.
If there was like an array, sorry, go ahead, Sen.
No, it's okay. You first.
I was just gonna ask, like, if there was an array for, let's say, test 1, 2, and 3, is it assumed that if you just use test, it's the first one, or do you have to specify it's the first one that you're using?
You have to specify the number at the position within the array.
Okay.
So test with parentheses 1 is the first position.
Got it. So if you were to just use test, they don't assume it's the first one, right? You do
No.
have to specify exactly which
You
one.
do have to
Okay.
specify. Unless you're using a command like a split command, we just say split it out or print it out on the screen. See, I want all of them. Just tell me what's in there, and it will just print them all out. So there are a couple of those commands that you don't need to put that parenthesis on there because I'm saying get them all. I don't want just one. I want them all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but other than that, like I said, just having a basic idea what an array is, because I have people have told me that they have people that have used arrays to store information for, and you can use it for, like, an example of this is like, say you're doing something based on zip code or something like this, not zip code, but like tax code or tax values for the state or something like that. Just say, well, you could store all those tax values in an array. You would just pull them out as you need them. Say, you know that position number 30 is going to be California. Position number, 29, you know what those positions are, and you can pull whichever one out you want. And that way you aren't storing 1,000 variables, you see. You're putting all those 1,000 variables into a single variable. It kind of makes things a little bit cleaner for you, So there are times when you might need to store lots of information for reference purposes within your code or something like that, for those things. And,
Got it. Thank you.
okay. All right.